Hello, welcome to the first Pokémon Unify video where I'll be breaking down the Pokémon Unify cards, specifically the design and why I structured it the way I did. So first off, a good example that I wanted to start off with is just this Pikachu card. So some of you might be able to tell that the designs are based off of the original official Pokemon cards. So like here I brought up this Pikachu. This is an official Pikachu card design. So obviously I based my designs very closely to the TCG. But I added a lot more complexity to it because I wanted to have more of the aspects of the video games rather than the simplicity of the trading card game. And I understand why they make it simple, you know. They want to appeal to a mass audience, they want to sell it better, but I'm just trying to replicate more of the feel of the video games. So as you can see, the names still stay above the image. I kept basic, the concept of basics, stage 1, stage 2s. Those who are not familiar with the TCG, basic just means like the first stage evolution, then stage 1 is the next stage, and then stage 2 is the final stage. Something new is that I added genders for Pokemon, unlike the official TCG, and that's because I had to make sure to include everything that affects different moves and abilities. So for example, like Nidoking has Rivalry, which affects their damage output depending on the gender of their opponent. Clefairy, I believe, has like Cute Charm, which affects, which activates based on gender. So gender is something I had to include into these cards in order to account for stuff like that. Generally, what I would do is that if a Pokemon appeared like, masculine like Machamp, I would give it, a male gender. If it was something like Clefairy, I'd give it female. And if it's something that, is kind of neutral, then I just default to male. It usually helps actually with the female cards because those will usually have a greater effect and impact. So that's just a small little detail. Next you'll see that I did add Gigantamax to this game. So anything that can Gigantamax will have the Gigantamax icon next to the name. There is no regular Dynamax just because I had a hard time trying to figure out how to properly implement that for every Pokemon, so I just chose to keep the Gigantamax only aspect since those are unique different forms. Next is just the types. So like this is Pikachu is just an electric type. Same with the official card game. They just have the type on the side here, except the difference is that in the official trading card game they only have one type most of the time. Sometimes they'll have two, but for the most part they'll just stay one type. But for Pokemon Unify, I decided to keep it always having all the types depending on if they do have it. So for example, like Charizard here, it's fire flying, so I kept it with anything that has a dual type will have the dual type in the card. And I decided to also change the pattern in the background to match the typings, so I've got a different pattern for each one of those as well. So that's just what it means for the types on the sides. Next is the evolution stages. Those will usually be around here in the top left corner, and there will be a description on how to obtain that evolution on there. Like for Pikachu, it's just you need a Thunderstone, same as the video games. But instead this time in Pokemon Unify, the evolution box is showing where the evolution goes rather than where the evolution came from. So unlike in the official trading card game, so like Pikachu here, it doesn't tell you that it evolves into Raichu. The Raichu card would actually say that it evolved from Pikachu. The reason I changed this up was because I needed the board game and the cards to be more easier for people who are not familiar with Pokemon, in case I tried to get anyone who's not familiar with Pokemon to play this with me. So that way that if someone encountered, Pikachu in the wild, they would know that, oh, it evolves into Raichu next, rather than wondering, does this evolve into anything? Like as if it was like this, So that's why that's that way. Next is the Pokeball icon here with the number. This represents the Pokemon's catch rate. So the reason I made this is because I wanted to emulate in the game the exact kind of catch, the way catching Pokemon works in the video games. So everything has the exact catch rate that it would have in the video games. So that way when you play the board game, we actually have an Excel sheet that you type in everything that it needs to calculate, like the max HP, how much HP has left, its catch rate, and then the ball modifiers, and then any kind of special conditions, if any. So if we look over to Cerebi, which is where I usually go for all of my when designing these cards, you can see here Pikachu catch rate right over here is 190. So that's how I got these numbers. So that's usually where I will find what I need in order to fill that space. So that's exactly right there, 190. Same with something like Charizard, for example. It'll have 45. That's just because the lower the number, the harder it is to catch. So after that, we have the power level. So this is something that I had to come up with, trying to think of, like, I needed something to keep track of, like, what is generally a more powerful Pokemon than something else. Think of it kind of like rarity for Pokemon, like in the official card game, there's like commons, uncommons, rares, ultra rares, but the difference here is that these actually are based off of the Pokemon's base stat total. So for example, for Pikachu here, it's a green, and the reason for that is if we go back to Cerebi and we go all the way down to Pikachu's stats, we'll see here that it has a base stat total of 320. So the formula that I use, that I came up with for this, is that there are 7 different power level colors, going from pink, green, blue, red, yellow, rainbow, and then platinum rainbow. So pink would be something with a base stat of 100 to 250. So things like that are typically Pokemon like Magikarp, Caterpie, really weak Pokemon with really low stats. And then green would be base stat total of 251 to 350. Then blue is 351 to 450. Red is 451 to 550, which is what Charizard is here, so that's why he's got a red circle. And then yellow is around 551 to 650. Those are usually about legendary Pokemon like Articuno, Moltres. And then we've got 651 to 700, which is Rainbow, which are the really strong legendaries like Mewtwo. And then the Platinum Rainbow would be something like Mega Mewtwo, just because the base stat total increases by a significant amount. So those are the cutoff lines that I came up with for these. The colors are actually a reference to the old Pokemon Master Trainer game. If you remember, for anyone who played that, the weaker tokens were all pink, and then as you kept going, the stronger Pokemon, got to be green, then blue, then red, and then the strongest Pokemon were usually yellow. So that's where the color coordination comes from. Nice little reference back to that board game that actually inspired me to create this. And these power levels do help actually with a lot of things, like certain Pokeballs actually factor in the color of the Pokemon you're trying to catch. and certain other cards, not for the board game necessarily, but the trading card game version actually really helped that I came up with this color coding system for base stat totals. But I'll get into that in the future. For now, that's basically what those different colors at the top represent. Next is the just the little details: Pokédex number, classification, and then weight. Weight's the most important one because there's actually attacks that factor into that, like heavy slam, low kick. Pokédex number kind of matters. If we're going with the trading card game version, this actually helps with knowing how many of that Pokemon you can run in your deck, which is usually only one per Pokédex number. So that helps with things like different forms that are the same Pokédex number, just a different form of that Pokemon. But that doesn't really matter for the board game version. Classification, that's one's just for fun. Next are the stats. So HP, attack, defense, special attack, special defense, and speed. So these I get from Cerebi as well. I mean, you can also probably get it from Bulbapedia, I believe, but Cerebi is just more organized. So for here, we've got the stats for Pikachu. So as you can see, it's 35 for HP, 55 for attack, 40 for defense, 50 for special attack, 50 for special defense, and 90 for speed. So what I did to figure out how to represent these best in the most neutral way is going by max stats with neutral nature at level 50. So every Pokemon Unify card is at level 50 at the most neutral level. This means no nature and no IVs or EVs. If you're not sure what those are, I would suggest looking that up because I really don't have time to go over that. But basically, I just choose here these stats. And if you notice, I go by the lowest stat here, the lowest number. And if you notice on all attack, defense, special defense, and speed, the number is always 5 more than the original base number. I can't remember why this is, but that's just how it is. So even though the actual base stat number is 55, in the video game it would actually appear as 60. So it's simply just add 5 to all of these. HP is a lot weirder. It increases by 60 more, so it goes from 35 to 95. This is treated the same as the rest of the stats, in that the base stats are not the actual numbers that I rely on. This is why I mainly focus on the middle lowest stats here. Basically it just goes, add 60 to HP and then add 5 to the rest. And what I usually do is round down. So here 55 would go to 60, so that would be 6 in attack. 40 would go to 45, which would just be 4 in defense. 50 would go to 55, which is just 5 in special attack. 50 would once again go to 55, which would be a 5 in special defense. And then 90 to 95, which would just be 9 in speed. And then of course 35 going to 95 would just be 9. So if we go back to the Pikachu card, you can see here that it's 9, 6, 4, 5, 5, 9. So that's how I figured out stats. It's the most neutral way, I believe, personally, to get the numbers that best represent these Pokemon without any other outside interference. No natures or IVs or EVs. And I believe it works out. And that's also something that's really, if you're not familiar with like the numbers in the games, then that's something that I've seen that some people might get mixed up on, is the HP. They'll think it's just an actual they'll think it's an actual 3 when it's actually should be a 9. But that's just this wacky calculation. Next, something I want to go back on actually is the evolution methods, which actually goes back to also the importance of the power levels. Is the evolution methods for something, well, these are not that good of example because they don't need EXP, but let me just bring down something that does. So for Charmander here, clearly you can see it needs 3 EXP to evolve into Charmeleon. So I had to figure out a way to represent gaining EXP in a board game, and the system I came up with, I feel like I did a pretty good job at figuring something out that was relatively simple, but also kind of fits with what the experience you'd have in the video game. So how did I come up with this EXP3? Okay, so if we go back to Cerebi again, if we go to Charmander instead, we can see that it evolves at level 16. So I looked at this and I thought, okay, how do I best represent this? So what I did is divide the level requirement by 5 and then just round it down. So 16 divided by 5 is 3. So that's where the 3 comes from. And so now you're wondering, how do you gain EXP? So the simple solution that I came up with was basically, if a green power level Pokemon defeats another green power level Pokemon, then they gain 1 XP. So all Charmander has to do is defeat 3 power level green Pokemon, and then it'll evolve because it gained 3 EXP, 1 per Pokemon it knocked out. And because they're about equal level, because they both have the same base stat total, so I feel like it's fair. So that means though that if Charmander defeated a pink level Pokemon like a Magikarp, it would not gain any EXP due to it being the Magikarp being way weaker, and so theoretically in the video games the amount of XP you'd gain would be really small, so that way it just doesn't count. And if it defeats something higher than its power level, so example, let's just say it beat an Ivysaur that was a level or power level blue, then it would gain 2 EXP because it defeated a power level Pokemon 1 stage higher than itself, and so on and so forth with the rest of the power level system. So thanks to that idea, that's how I figured out how to emulate kind of Pokemon knocking other Pokemon out, gaining EXP, and then using that to evolve. And so if we look now at Charmeleon, it requires 4 EXP to evolve. So how did I come up with the following Pokemon EXP requirements? So Charmeleon will evolve into Charizard at level 36. So instead of just dividing 36 by 5 and then having that be the EXP requirement, I had to keep in mind that by this time that it's a Charmeleon, it's already at level 16. So those 16 original points to get there, or levels, should not count towards this 36. So what I did was that any next evolutions levels would get decreased by the previous evolutions levels. So this 36 would actually be subtracted by 16 to be 20, and then I divide the 20 by 5, and then that's how I get the 4 EXP requirements to evolve into the Charizard. And that's basically the EXP system explained briefly. There's a little bit more to it, but for now I'm just trying to explain mainly how to read these cards and how to get the main idea across. But I'll go into more details about everything at a much later time. So yeah, that's all that upper area. Now onto the abilities. So for abilities, I usually picked what was the best ability for a Pokemon, regardless if it was a hidden ability or not, because it's just a matter of just having the best of what the Pokemon has to offer. But if a Pokemon did have more than one good ability, then that's when I would decide, let's have more than one version of that Pokemon out. A Pokemon card, for it. So, yeah, that's basically it. And then, the abilities did have to be sort of shortened down or simplified, but they overall still explain exactly what the actual thing does in the video games. For Pikachu's example here, if a Pokemon makes physical contact with this Pokemon, they become paralyzed, save of 7. So I guess now's a good time to just explain what the save of 7 means. Anytime you see this, it just basically means to roll a d20, and the odds are actually, thankfully, the same as they would be in the video game, thanks to all the percentages of something happening in the video game being divisible by 5. So if we think of a d20 divided by 5, then that could count as all the percentages of something in the video game. So for example, in the video game, Static has a 30% chance of activating when something makes physical contact with Pikachu. So if you divide 30 by 5, you get 7. And so that's why you get 6. And so that's why I make it a save of 7, because that means that if you roll a d20 and you get 7 or higher, then that means you avoided the 30% chance of it activating. Whereas if you got 6 or less, then that means that 30% chance of happening actually did happen, as represented through a random d20 roll. So yeah, anytime you see anything like save of 11, that's a 50% chance. Save of 7, usually things will be save of 3, just because most things have a 10% chance of activating, and so on. So now if we go down to attacks, it's always 4, unless some special cases, but basically it's always going to be 4 attacks, unlike the official TCG that usually will only have, let's see here, they usually only have a few attacks here, like 2. I always found that a little annoying, but I get it. There's not much room here to fit too much else, but I managed to figure out a way to organize the attacks well enough to fit 4 exactly, along with all the details that you need to be able to properly do these attacks in the board game form or in the trading card game form. So first on the side here are the names, obviously, and then the type that attack is, and then its category, and then its damage output, and then any effects that it has, and lastly its accuracy. So let's go by this one at a time. So here the name obviously is just the name of the attack, then the typing. So usually the cool thing about this is that if you have a Pokemon with multiple different types of attacks, then you can hit things for different weaknesses, whereas in the trading card game, the type that you were counts for all of your attacks. So in the video games, Quick Attack is not an electric move, but in the card game, because Pikachu is an electric type, any attacks it does to anything else count as electric. So this Quick Attack would count as an electric attack and apply weakness on any opposing Pokemon, which I never found I was just always annoyed at, but again, I understood simplicity. But that's not what I'm going for in Pokemon Unify. So after the type of attack, you would have the category of the attack, so it's simply just physical, special, and status. But there is a 4th category that I had to make up for taking into account if a move makes physical contact, because not all physical moves will make physical contact. Okay, so if I bring in this Venusaur real quick. it's got Petal Blizzard and Double Edge. So if you notice, the Petal Blizzard physical category is red-ish in the middle, whereas the normal one is usually yellow. So the red here symbolizes that this physical attack does not make physical contact with the target, but it is still a physical attack. Whereas the yellow is they make a physical attack. So if this Venusaur, let's say, were to be fighting this Pikachu and it uses Double Edge, the opponent's Pikachu would roll for static and potentially paralyze the Venusaur if they roll the 6 or less on the D20 roll, which is, you know, really really the disadvantage of being using physical attacks. But that's why I had to also make the second physical category. So if it uses Petal Blizzard, for example, the opponent's Pikachu would not be able to roll for static because it's not making physical contact. So yeah, that's the only reason why you'll see some red and some yellow on some cards. And then the status one, obviously it means it's just a status move, so these generally do not do damage, if ever. That's why they have these 2 blank spaces. I got this from, I believe, Cerebi as well. They'll usually put blank spaces next to status moves to represent that they don't do damage. So for these, you just apply whatever the effect is here. And then lastly on these is the accuracy. So accuracy works very similar to the save of 7 concept. It's another D20 roll, and this is to represent that you need to roll greater than or equal to whatever this number is in order for your attack to hit. So if you see a 1, that pretty much means that the attack can't miss. It's a 100% accurate move. But if you see anything other than a 1, then yeah, it has a chance to miss. So if you're trying to Thunder Wave something, you gotta roll a d20, and if you roll 2 or 1 on your roll, then your attack missed, which thankfully exactly represents the percentages of a Pokemon's attack actually being able to hit something, just like the video game. So Thunder Wave in the video game has a 90% chance of landing. So if you divide again by 5, the 10% chance, then that's a 2. So if 20 times 5 is 100, so that's how I'm able to actually represent these accurately in a d20 roll. Same with Sleep Powder here. It doesn't do damage. It simply just says target falls asleep, but it needs a 6 or higher on a d20 to hit. But for example, any of these other ones here, let's say like this Pikachu one, Spark, 3 damage, and the target is paralyzed, save a 7, which is basically just means the opponent would have to roll for this save, because they're trying to avoid getting paralyzed. So if they roll 6 or less, then they're paralyzed. And then the Electro Ball here, the question mark is usually for a move that will be more complicated. It involves a lot more work to figure out the actual calculations of the damage. So basically this is just giving a short summary. The faster the user is than the target, then the greater the move's power. Check chart for power. So there are a few moves in Pokemon Unify that do require a separate chart to figure out. So for example, this is the Electro Ball chart, which is exactly the same translated from the one on Bulbapedia. If I could go back here, let me see here. If I could go back, here we go, Electro Ball. And as you notice, this looks very similar to the one I was showing earlier. So all I did was simply figure out how this worked mathematically, and then translate it over to a chart that works exactly with the game's damage calculation. And so if you notice, all damage is translated by cutting the initial base power of the move in half. So for example here, 40 base power becomes 20, 60 base power becomes 30, or 3, you know, everything's a single digit really. Just like here. So that's that. Okay, and then how I came up with the numbers here, if you remember, when I first started this, I used to represent these through damage dice. So that was to represent the actual numbers from the video game. So let me go back here to let's see, Pikachu. If we look at Spark, it's a base 65 power move. I used to represent this by having a D6 right here where the 3 was. Basically because I wasn't sure how to represent damage when doing the when trying to figure out how to represent like getting actual damage calculations to be just like the video game, so I just had it be dice rolls, which was not the best move due to either rolling too low or too high and getting numbers that were just not something you'd see in the video game. Eventually I did figure out that all I had to do to actually get numbers that I wanted was that I just needed to cut the damage of all base power moves in half. So all 60, and of course not counting any decimal or rounding down as well. So anything with 65 base power would go down to just being 3, or 80 would go down to just being 4. 90 unfortunately would also go down to just being 4, since I didn't want to have to do 4.5 or something like that. Thunder would also go down to just being a 5 power move. But overall, when you look at the damage formula, this is what I use to figure this out. On Pokemon Showdown, I use the Pokemon damage calculator. So if we look here, I'm actually going to demonstrate here how the damage formula works, or yeah, for fighting. So I already have here Charizard and Machamp. So let me just go back to show this real quick. So let's say here this Charizard is fighting this Machamp. So obviously it could just go for Air Slash and hit for weakness, but the whole point is we're trying to calculate some kind of neutral damage attack. So let's just say Charizard here is attacking with Heat Wave against this Machamp. So how battling works in Pokemon Unify is basically, you can do this in your head, but I mean, I'm not that good at math, so I actually do use a calculator. Most people will use a calculator just because it's just faster to get it, and sometimes you get decimals and you just don't want to really think about it. But basically, you take, based on the attack's category, like physical or special, you'll use either your physical or your special attack stat against their physical defense or special defense stat. So in this case here, Charizard would attack first because its speed stat is 10 compared to Machamp's 6. So just like the video games, speed matters in terms of who gets to attack first. When you, let's say here Charizard's going to use Heat Wave, so that means that we'll have to use our special attack of 11 divided by Machamp's special defense of 9 times the move's base power, which is 4. And so let me just put that in real quick. 11 divided by 9 times 4, and then we also need to account for stab, which, if you're not familiar, in the video game, stab stands for same type attack bonus, which basically means that if the type of attack you're using is the same as the type that you are, then you get a 1.5 times boost to your damage output. So once again, it's 11 special attack divided by their 9 special defense times 4 base power times 1.5 for stab, which equals a total of 7.3333, And so we don't count any decimals, so we just simply apply 7 damage. And that's basically how the attacking in Pokemon Unify works. So let me show you why that's extremely accurate to what you would see in the video games. So here we have a Charizard, level 50, that's very important, with 0 IVs and no EV investments, neutral nature, against a Machamp who we're going to reset here to level 50 and reset all of their IVs to 0. Alright, and then we're going to give Charizard here Heat Wave. And if you see a 0 special attack Charizard Heat Wave versus a 0 HP and 0 special defense Machamp is 67 to 81 damage. Unfortunately, in the video game, there is a percentage. There's no set damage really. There's always the chance that your Pokemon could do slightly more or slightly less, but overall it will be around a small percentage range. So it's a 39.8% chance to 2-hit KO. So here, if you see what's between 67 and 81, around I'd say 70. So if we think about it that way, when we did 7 damage, we pretty much accurately got very close to, if not exactly the middle of where the damage would be in the video game. So luckily, the only thing I had to do was just basically cut all base damage in half, and I got pretty much the exact formula that the video game uses in a very simplified form, which I found to be very fortunate, because before I used to use, we were testing out almost an Excel sheet as well, where we had to type in everything here, but it was also built on the actual formula that was used in the video game, but it was just too clunky and not worth it. And this is a lot simpler, and it's, again, it takes less than a minute, less than a few seconds really, to type in all of that to figure out how much damage you're doing, and in the end you're getting rewarded with the actual damage you would be doing if this was in the video game and there were no stats increases, and it was just based on the actual stats of the Pokemon, their base stats at least. So yeah, that's the attack. That's how attacking works. That's how all that works. But during that Heat Wave, we would have also had to roll for our accuracy. And at the same time, the accuracy roll also can count as the crit roll. Basically, if you get a natural 20, then you landed a critical hit, which is just another 1.5 increase to your attack power. And because a D20 roll would also mean that the move would hit, just because, you know, anything that requires a 20 to roll would always hit, unless their evasion was insane. That would also mean that you just also landed the crit as well. So you don't have to roll once for accuracy and then once to see if you crit. It can all just be in one roll. And then lastly is the weaknesses, resistance, and immunity on the bottom here. And I made sure to be able to fit everything on there, because let me tell you, one really annoying thing I did not like about the official trading card game was the fact that weaknesses and resistances were usually limited to just one thing. And even worse, most of the time, most Pokemon did not have a resistance. It was always just a weakness. And of course, I included every single type of all the 18 types in Pokemon into this game as well. So unlike the official trading card game, where fighting counts as both fighting, rock, and ground, in Pokemon Unify there actually is a ground, rock, and fighting type, as well as every other type. That way there's no BS like Kyurem being a water type in the official trading card game. It would actually be ice. Charizard being part flying, whereas the official trading card game has no flying type, and so on and so forth. You get the idea. And this allows me to also represent every single actual weakness that would, and resistance and immunity that would be in the game, as opposed to the 1 or 2 in the official trading card game. As well as special weaknesses, like Charizard here has a ×4 weakness to rock, because being part fire and flying makes it weak to rock twice. So usually the broader weakness multiplication would be up here, ×2, ×1.5, ×0. But if something has a quadruple weakness or resistance, then that will be highlighted as well in here next to the specific types themselves. So here, grass and bug would be resisted by ×0.25, whereas fire, fighting, steel, and fairy would all get the usual ×0.5 resistance. And that's basically it. Hello, I noticed during editing that I forgot to mention why I chose certain moves and what my mindset is when choosing movesets for Pokemon, so I'm going to go over that right now. For this example, I'm going to be using the Venusaur line. So for here, we're going to start off with Bulbasaur, and we see here that he starts off with Razor Leaf, Tackle, Sleep Powder, and Leech Seed. So if we go to Bulbapedia, or no, Cerebi, sorry. What's most important here is that you look at what level they evolve at. So Bulbasaur will evolve into Ivysaur at level 16, which means that when you go down to look at their standard level up moves, you cannot give them anything that they would learn at the level that they would evolve at, basically. So level 16 or higher moves are basically out of the question for Bulbasaur. There are a few exceptions to this rule, where in past gens some Pokemon will learn some good moves earlier than other gens, where they'll just switch it around. They'll learn one move at level 8, and then next gen they'll learn it at level 16, and that kind of messes things up. So I'll generally go for whatever's most favorable. But besides those rare exceptions, this is usually what I'll stick with. And so when it comes to choosing those kind of moves, I'll usually avoid things like Growl or Growth, because those aren't really that good. Generally people don't use those when playing in the normal games anyway. You usually go for, whatever hits hardest, or if there's room, obviously, then we'll go for like status condition moves and Leech Seed, stuff like that. It also helps if you know the game very well and you've played competitively, then certain moves are good to have at certain times. But for the most part, it's not too difficult. So anyway, so that's why Bulbasaur got those moves, because it can learn Razor Leaf at least before level 16. So I got that rather than something like Vine Whip. Looking back, I did give it Tackle. This is simply just to give it something to hit with other than a grass move. So some variety there, at least. But anyway, so then moving on to Ivysaur, if we see here, it got Seed Bomb, Takedown, and then Sleep Powder and Leech Seed. Sleep Powder and Leech Seed are pretty much going to stay because those are such great moves for this Pokemon line. But as you'll see here, Ivysaur evolves at level 32, so that means that anything that they would learn at level 32 over is not accessible, so none of these things, obviously. So the next best thing would be Seed Bomb and Takedown, and obviously Seed Bomb is better in terms of damage over Razor Leaf, and then Takedown is obviously just a better tackle, so those two moves would replace their respective moves. And then finally, for Venusaur, once you get there, you basically can grab anything on the in the movesets. Obviously, some things they'll learn as soon as they evolve that you didn't see in the other standard level up areas like Petal Blizzard, or and then Double Edge replaces Takedown, and so and so. So that's why those moves are there. Now normally Synthesis would be something that I could consider, but it's just not that often used in terms of like competitive battling, because these cards are designed with competitive battling in mind, and usually Leech Seed is usually used more over something like Synthesis anyway. But yeah, that's basically move selection and how I choose my moves. Keep in mind these are being designed with competitive battling in mind for mainly doubles, but also singles in a way. So yeah, I have to balance both of those at the same time, while at the same time I also cannot give them TM moves. So we're strictly only allowed to use, or basically I'm restricted to only being allowed to use what they can naturally learn while leveling up. So TMs and technical machine kind of moves, it's not something I can add, usually because otherwise then the move options are just too extreme. And at the same time I'm trying to keep this to just the video games, self-contained. And I do plan to add TMs at a later date, so you'll be able to customize moves on a Pokemon anyway, hopefully, once I can figure out how to implement those. But yeah, that's all for now. Back to the previous video. That's the Pokemon Unify card breakdown, as well as a quick example of how the battle system works. I hope you've enjoyed this video. This is my first time trying something like this out. I hope to make more videos breaking down how I design these cards, how I design the overall game. And if you'd like to support me, Ko-Fi shop will be in the link down below. I really appreciate any help or support. I am selling digital and physical versions of these cards, so that you could print them at home, or you can order them from me and I will print and cut them for you. And I even offer commissions, so if you want a specific Pokemon, you can order the ability to be changed, the stats to be changed, and the attacks to all be changed. Or I can even make new Pokemon or fake mons of cards and all that stuff. But yeah, I hope to be able to get this game available eventually. Hopefully, my goal is by May to have all the rules settled out, all the more cards added. I still need to add TMs and all of that. But yeah, this video has gone on long enough. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more content hopefully in the future. And be sure to check out my socials. I'll start posting a couple bit more, and my shop and everything else. Thank you so much.